My Life with Ruby Allegra.
This week I have Ruby. So as always, I'll hand over to you, Ruby, to introduce yourself.
Yep. Hi, my name's Ruby or Ruby Allegra, and I am a non-binary, disabled, queer person. My pronouns are they, them. I am an artist. I am a speech pathologist. I am, I guess, a writer, maybe.
Yeah.
I do a lot of, I guess, activism kind of stuff. So could be an activist, I guess. And I am a cat owner.
Very important.
Very important. Yeah, I live on Ghana land in what many people might know as South Australia, in Adelaide. And that's kind of me in a nutshell, I guess. I use a powered wheelchair for mobility. I have a congenital physical disability, and I also have mental illness, and I am very likely to be neurodivergent as well. Yeah.
Thank you for that introduction. One thing I literally just thought of was how you sort of were talking about how you're an activist, and you sort of weren't embracing that totally. And I do the exact same, but I find that most of my friends that are people with disability are also sort of activists and find the same. And if so, why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think, and I guess I can't speak on behalf of everyone, and I can't speak on behalf of people from other minority backgrounds, but I think that quite frequently when you have someone who's from a marginalized community, there always seems to be kind of an expectation that these people from these communities are kind of expected to engage in their own activism and educating and kind of talking about their experiences with ableism or transphobia or racism, for example. So I think like a lot of my sort of activism has been born out of necessity, I guess, because you know I'm engaging in activism, I guess, for the purposes of having access to physical spaces or healthcare, or fighting to have your needs met, fighting to have access to services and therapy, and having to justify our needs, I think, for a lot of things. So I think like for me, my activism, has been born out of necessity and literally just having to fight to have my needs met in the real world, which I think a lot of people kind of like they don't necessarily realize that for a lot of people activism is literally just fighting for our own lives, lives of others in our communities. And quite often we do it because we have to, because other people don't. Other people, allies, don't step up and do this work for us. They do it because it's like it's deeply embedded in every fiber of my existence. In every moment of my life, there is an element of activism.
Yeah, I love that, and feel very similar about why I do what I do as well. So it's A, to survive, and B, to hopefully create some sort of impact that will create some sort of better future for people with disability. So next question I'd like to move on to is if you could explain some of the main barriers that you face in society.
Well, I guess first and foremost, I think that, the thing that people would think first is physical access, because I use a powered wheelchair for mobility. And that has its own kind of set of of access barriers that come with not only having a visible physical disability, but also having a mobility aid that is quite big and not that easy to move around, like transport around. For example, the public transport system isn't particularly reliable or accessible at times. So it can make it difficult to get around that way. Housing as well, that housing everywhere is not accessible. Housing isn't really a thing. I'm very lucky that I am living in a house that was built with access in mind, and that's only because I know the person who built the house. So I'm very, very lucky in that regard. But that's something that's quite tricky, because it also means that I can't go to many of my friends' houses, and I can't really access a lot of public spaces, whether it's gigs at music venues or bars, clubs, pubs, restaurants, shops.
And I think that's the thing as well. Like, people have this idea that like social isolation for people with disability is specifically because of the fact that they are a person with disability, or like because of their impairment or their diagnosis. But it's like, I think you'll find that a lot of the time it's because of the spaces that the general community likes to like congregate in and be social in just still aren't accessible.
Totally. And that, that very much feeds into, as you know, the medical model of disability, which focuses on the idea that the problem is the impairment, and that is what needs to be worked on and fixed, rather than the environment and the world that we're in not being accessible. So I think, I guess just like living in this world as a physically disabled person, it is a world that first and foremost prioritizes non-disabled, able-bodied people.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people assume when they see me that the physical stuff is like the hardest, but like there is nothing more deeply and intensely interwoven into every part of my existence. There's nothing more intense than my experience of ableism.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the biggest thing, because it just finds its way into every aspect of my life, every moment of my existence. And I think the scary thing too is the fact that internalized ableism is also a thing. So I can't even escape from it in my own head. We are brought up thinking certain things about disability and what it means to be disabled, and we have our preconceived ideas about disabled identity and existence that we are taught, and we internalize those things. So as difficult as it might be for someone else to unlearn ableism, I think it's much more difficult for me to unlearn internalized ableism.
Yeah.
Especially when it's reinforced everywhere, in terms of representation in the media or magazines and books, and then that you see that in the way that the physical world is set up with access and stuff like that.
I know. I find it scary when I like have a thought or like post something on social media or like have a conversation with someone and reflect on that moment, and I'm like, holy fuck, there was so much internalized ableism for myself in that.
Totally.
Then you you reflect on it and you're like, this is so sad and so scary.
Yeah.
To be continued. Dating, realizing stuff, and intersectionality.